Oh boy, this is a fragrance I've been really excited about. I finally ordered a bottle from the house of Maison Margiela Replica series fragrance from the garden. This is it right here, created by Olivier Cresp. And even though I really enjoy the smell, there are some negatives about it, which I'm going to go into detail when I'm speaking about it. But From the Garden focuses on the tomato leaf note, a note that I really enjoy in fragrances. It is a green note, herbal aromatic. Do you guys enjoy this note in fragrances? Do let me know, put a comment down below. But I'm going to go into detail and explain to you this fragrance. Also, in the same video, you're going to hear about 11 other tomato or tomato leaf focused fragrances. So if you're curious to learn about From the Garden and tomato leaf fragrances, then please stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in. It's Sebastian. We're talking about Maison Margiela's latest replica fragrance From the Garden. Have you gotten your nose on it? Is it a kind of fragrance that you guys are excited about? Do you enjoy tomato leaf and fragrances? Do you like herbal aromatic green fragrances, or even fragrances that go into the vegetal or vegetable direction? In fact, I have a video on the channel I did last year on vegetables and perfumes. If you want to find out more about those kind of fragrances, you can tune in. In fact, I'll have it linked in the info box. But yeah, this was a fragrance I've been really excited about. I really enjoy tomato leaf. My dad used to garden, and one of the things that I loved that he grew were tomatoes. So whole yards of tomatoes growing, and the bushes or shrubs, and then you can smell them when you're walking through them. So that smell has left a major impression. So ever since I discovered SISLEY's Eau de Campagne, created by Jean-Claude Elena, focusing on tomato leaves, I have been a big fan of tomato leaves in fragrances. And that's why this one was very exciting to me, and I really enjoy it. So there's negatives, and I'll tell you about the negatives. But this is the latest from Maison Margiela, From the Garden, a replica fragrance, 2024 launch, created by Olivier Cresp, perfumer from Firmenich. He's done a lot of different fragrances, so many. And it seems like lately he's cranking out a lot of fragrances as well. This is 100 ml, currently selling for $165. Eau De Toilette concentration. This is a kind of a negative for me about this series of fragrances. And that's the negative about this fragrance. I'll tell you why. And this is considered a Chypre, maybe a green Chypre, featuring notes of green Mandarin, grapefruit, blackcurrant. That's in the top notes. In the heart notes, we've got tomato leaf accord, geranium bourbon, Madagascar rose accord. Finally, in the base notes, we've got Indonesian patchouli, crystal moss, and white musk. So initially, when you first spray this, it's all tomato leaves, because that's the prominent note in this. And they say tomato leaf accord, so we're creating the smell with various other ingredients. I guess you can't really extract the tomato leaf. I'm not 100% sure on the technicalities, but they have accomplished the smell of the tomato leaves here. It's perfection. I love that about it. It's uber green, aromatic, herbal, and that bitterness is there from the leaves. If you've ever spent some time near tomato bushes and the leaves there, especially when it's under the sun baking, you can really smell it, because the aroma, is just really like projecting off of the plants. It's prominent here, but for me, this is quite fresh, because up top, they've got a lot of citruses, and the citruses mixed with the tomato leaf accord, really fantastic. In the heart notes, you've also got the geranium. The geranium is here giving you more of an aromatic herbal touch, creating a light rosiness. And I think it's because of the rose here and the geranium here in the heart notes, and the patchouli and the moss in the base notes. That's why they're calling this a Chypre, because typical, those are the kind of notes there are in fragrances, usually starting with the citruses up top. There usually is also a labdanum note that's typically credited in a Chypre fragrance, but this is a way they're getting away with calling this a Chypre. For me, it acts a bit like a Chypre, but I wouldn't call this a full-on Chypre. But when the fragrance is finally drying down, you enjoy the patchouli here. It does get musky. And then, of course, you'll notice the kind of cold and lightly metallic kind of mossy notes in the base as well, which kind of round out the fragrance and makes it very cooling. There's a very fresh quality about this fragrance. Fresh, invigorating, and also green, uber green. This is extremely green, and the fact that it's a tomato leaf overdose, it's really focusing and highlighting that tomato leaf here. And I just really love the way this smells. Just kind of brings the tomato garden to life here for me. But more, my experience with the tomato garden when the tomatoes have grown is a lot of warmth, sunbaking them, as I said. Here it's very fresh and more of a cooling take. So it's a bit different, but the smell is captured perfectly. But the negative about this fragrance is the fact that it is very light wearing. It's not dense, it's not thick, it's not heavy. It's really, really fresh, extremely fresh. The smell is fantastic, but I wish I was given something a lot more substantial, not a freshie. So this would be like an alternative to a fresh fragrance wear, because there's a lot of the citruses and you know, the herbs here, or the herbal touches of the tomato. And then of course, by the time it's getting dry into the base, it's kind of at the end of the life of the fragrance when it's in the patchouli, the moss, and the musk section of the fragrance. So that's a big negative for me. But then again, I think this will be perfect in the heat. Once again, I keep saying that with a lot of these fresh wearing fragrances or lighter wearing fragrances or the Eau De Toilettes that I've been speaking about. But this one will shine in the heat for sure. I've worn plenty of Eau de Campagne from the house of SISLEY. This is also an Eau de Toilette featuring the tomato leaf, launched in the late 70s, created by Jean-Claude Helena. And this, to me, is like a better version of that, but similar concentration. But as far as the smell goes, it seems more like raw in your face, whereas the SISLEY Eau de Campagne seems to be a bit reformulated, and it just seems a bit muted, so that the notes are not coming out or jumping out. But for me, it wears a bit similarly because it's Eau de Toilette concentration, just the fact that this has the notes really in there. It's a brand new release, so you're not going through any reformulations where they've kind of muted the notes that are in the fragrance, which typically happens, and then eventually with too much reformulations, the fragrance doesn't smell good anymore. They've kept that really nicely, but I do prefer the way this one smells compared to that now. I just wish it was a bit more potent and a bit more substantial and longer lasting, but maybe the way this fragrance is created, it won't work with a more, I guess, substantial concentration, like an Eau de Parfum or something. So maybe the Eau de Toilette was perfect for it. I just wish it was a little longer lived and a bit more, you know, louder. It sits closer to the skin with, you know, early on when you first spray it, it does have that projection, but that projection disappears and it sits really close to you. So, but I love the smell. This is a really, really great offering. The other negative, I should say, is the price point. The Maison Margiela fragrances have really skyrocketed up to $165, and that's another negative for this. It's an Eau de Toilette concentration, but we're paying $165 for it. But everything seems to be going up. When I first started buying Maison Margiela, it was around $125 for 100 ml. So $40 since 2016, I guess. Maybe prices, you know, are going to go up. But let me know your thoughts on Maison Margiela's from the garden. Have you gotten your nose on it? Do you enjoy it? Do you enjoy tomato leaf notes and fragrances? Put a comment down below so I can find out. But for me, I do enjoy the smell. I just wish it was a little stronger. But let me find out from you guys if you're experienced with it already, or you're skipping this one out because the tomato leaf note sounds a bit weird. Maybe it does wear a bit like salad. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. It's kind of green, herbal, but not really. The other thing I want to say also, it does hint a little bit at Lombardon L'Eau from the house of Diptyque. But once again, Lombardon L'Eau has been around since 1983, the original in Eau de Toilette. The Eau de Parfum, I believe, came out towards the latter part of the 2000s, maybe very early 2010. But once again, when I compare Lombardon L'Eau with Maison Margiela's from the garden, I much prefer the way from the garden is smelling, but it does have that very light quality about it, very light wear about it, which is mostly the disappointing part about it. But then again, I'm saying, maybe if they made this a little denser, thicker, more intense, I don't think it would smell like this. So maybe it's the way it is the way we're going to, you know, basically get, which is what they've given us anyway. But if you are familiar with Lombardon L'Eau, you'll probably know a little bit about how From the Garden smells. They have similarities. And I think the way they're smelling similar is the note that I forgot to mention, except for the fact that when I read the notes to you guys, From the Garden does feature a prominent blackcurrant accord. Not very prominent, but prominently it's there. You'll notice it. And that's what L'Ombre Down Low is known about, that blackcurrant note. But it's not about the tomato leaf note there. It's more about cassis and cassis leaves, which is the blackcurrant leaves, and of course the fruit. Here we only have the fruit, but they've created a tomato leaf accord. Could come off a little bit like blackcurrant leaves, who knows. But yeah, this is a good one. Just the price point is high and it's not as dense as I wanted it to be. Then let me know what your thoughts are on From the Garden. And up next is the fragrance from the house of SISLEY. It's called Eau de Campagne, this one right here. And this is, like I said, an eau de cologne style fragrance because it came out in the late 70s, I believe around 76. Brand new release, or I think probably one of the first fragrances for Jean-Claude Ylena and the first fragrance for this house, I believe. It's tomato leaves with basil. There's oakmoss, geranium, lemons, bergamot, vetiver, galbanum, patchouli, musk, lily of the valley, jasmine, and plum. It wears like an eau de cologne. It's light, it's refreshing, it's invigorating. It has that bitter herbal quality of the tomato leaves with all the other aromatic citruses and musky notes. Wonderful fragrance. If you haven't tried this one, please do. It's one of the best that Jean-Claude Ylena has created. And if you'll notice in this video, I won't be speaking about Sur le Nil from the house, Un Jardin sur le Nil from the house of Hermès. He created that fragrance as well. According to Hermès, I don't find the notes of tomato leaves listed, but a lot of people say there are tomato leaves in it. Both of these fragrances, the SISLEY Eau de Campagne and the Sur le Nil from Hermès, do not smell alike to me. But just wanted to mention that. Let me know if you're a fan of it and you get the tomato. Although I believe the Sur le Nil is more about the tomato fruit rather than the tomato leaves. But moving on to the house of L'Artisan Parfumeur, we've got VETIVER ECARLATE, which was also recently featured in a VETIVER video. VETIVER tomato leaves, but this one also has a lot of grapefruit. For me, it's a really great, once again, fresh, invigorating, kind of herbal take on that greenness of the tomato leaves with the juicy, zingy spiciness of the grapefruit, and then the woody grassiness of the VETIVER. This is part of the vegetables series of fragrances from L'Artisan, and they've done a great job with several of their fragrances, and this is one of my favorites, and I really enjoy smelling the vetiver against the grapefruit and the tomato leaves, which pretty much stand out. So if you haven't tried this L'Artisan, please do. I think it's pretty enjoyable, especially if you're the type of person that enjoys tomato leaves and fragrances. But this next one, the second tomato leaf fragrance that I was really into early on in my journey, it's Memo Paris's Italian Leather. So Italian Leather is part of the series of leather fragrances, and each one goes to a different country, territory, or place, and they focus on highlight an ingredient that would be used there. So in this case, we're going to Italy. Tomatoes are used in Italy for sauces and things like that, but we're not really using the tomato here. We're just using the leaves once again. So here's the other thing I did not mention when I spoke about this just a little while ago. So Memo Paris's Italian Leather has been a favorite of mine since like the early 2010s. This is a brand new bottle I just received. It's reminding me of Iris Malikan from the house of Maison Crivelli. Are you guys familiar with that one? Not identical, but somewhat similar. Whereas the Iris Malikan is about iris, galbanum, and leather. Here it's a leather-focused fragrance. Galbanum and tomato leaf might, come off kind of similar. They're both bitter green and a bit herbal. So it's reminding me of that fragrance. Not a lot. This is more about the leather, less about the powdery iris touches, but the tomato leaf in here is reminding me of the galbanum in Iris Malikan. Let me know if you guys got that similarity. I don't know if the formula has changed. I haven't put my nose on it since the original bottle of mine ran out, and I received a fake, which doesn't smell anything like this. But this is tomato leaf with the leather, vanilla, galbanum, benzoin, tolu balsam, labdanum, clary sage, myrrh, and on with a lot of different notes. It does feature galbanum for sure, but I think maybe the tomato leaves are kind of blended in a way here that highlights the galbanum more, or kind of like blends with the galbanum, because that's, like I said, they have similarities. And now the fragrance is smelling like Iris Malikan to me. It's a great release though. Both of them are really great. This is Italian Leather from Memo Paris. Let me know if you guys get those similarities. Next up, going to a fairly underrated house of Parfum d'Empire. This is Corsica Furiosa, this one right here. Are you familiar with this one? This is a very interesting take on tomato leaves. It is highlighting the island of Corsica off the coast of France, and it's focusing on ingredients that come from there. But this one has lots of tomato leaf with wild mint, Oakmoss, Eau-De-Vie, which is a fruit brandy, I believe, from Corsica, and then mastic resin. So it's quite resinous here against the tomato leaves and the Oakmoss and the wild mint, and of course the fruity brandy or fruit brandy of the Eau-De-Vie. You'll notice the resin in here, but mastic resin doesn't smell like a lot of other resins. There's something different about it that doesn't create a lot of ambery effect, the traditional ambery effect of other resins like benzoin, myrrh, and things like that. But you'll notice quite a lot of mastic resin against the tomato leaves, and there is that kind of resinous touch here, which is quite interesting and really great with the tomato leaves. I think it works great. Once again, this is not necessarily uber intense, so wears a bit fresh, but the mastic resin or the lentiscus note in here does have that substance where you'll notice the resinous touches. So this is Corsica Furiosa from the house of Parfum the Empire. Next up, going to the house of Steppaboard, it's Bosco Sospeso. This is a really fun fragrance. This is featuring tomato leaves with patchouli. And so the tomato leaves, it's really green and herbal. And the patchouli has that earthy, woody, slight greenness. So the tomato leaves and the patchouli really work wonderfully against also the petitgrain note, absinthe, thyme, pittosporum leaves, and the flowers and tree musks. This is a really, really great fragrance. My favorite from this house. I absolutely love it. There's a light hint of something like angel in there, but going in a green direction. But I wish they made it as a regular fragrance, because in this, it's more of like a all over and hair perfume like this. But I like to wear my fragrances more like a regular fragrance, but the smell is so, so good. You'll really notice the tomato leaves. You'll really notice the patchouli, the petitgrain, and the absinthe together, blended perfectly. And it's a fragrance created by what's his name? Bertrand Duchaffois. I almost said Dominique Ripion. But a wonderful offering. It's Steppaboard Bosco Sospeso. Check it out for a really great tomato leaf fragrance. And the next fragrance is from the house of Pierre Guillaume, a brand new one called Orchid Ivy 21.1. This one is a very interesting take on tomato leaves, in that the tomato leaves are not fully in your face. They're nicely blended in to contrast the candied vanilla touches that are in here. So it's vanilla, raspberry, ivy, tomato leaves, gardenia, hay, tonka beans. So I feel like in this fragrance, the vanilla and the raspberry are creating a bit of a candied effect. When I wore this one, I felt like the sweetness became a bit candied, but then you've got the ivy and the tomato leaves cutting through, and you'll notice that separation of this greenness kind of coming through it. But along the way, the gardenia also, I feel like, contributes to a bit of a candied floral effect, and the hay and the tonka to accentuate the fragrance and take it into the base notes here. It's a really great fragrance, but it is sweet. It does get sweet, and I was actually expecting a bit more green, a bit more herbal. But the only thing that the tomato leaves and the ivy does is just really cuts right through and separates the fragrance, but still keeping its sweet, candied floral touches. So this is Orchid Ivy 21.1 from the house of Pierre Guillaume. It's a very underrated house. Once again, really love it. Not a lot of people speak about it. But moving on to the house of Shea and Blue. This is Dandelion Fig, this one right here. Another really great tomato leaf focused fragrance, but this time tomato leaves blended with fig leaves. And they do work really wonderfully. Both of them are bitter green, but they smell different. And this one also has dandelion, lemongrass, and juniper. So it's aromatic, it's herbal, it's spicy, it's bitter, it's green, but a really, really great fragrance to wear in the summertime when you want something green, refreshing, a bit metallic and sharp and clean, crisp with the juniper and some floral touches. I think if you're looking for a twist on the fig fragrance style, and with the addition of the herbal green bitterness of the tomato leaves, definitely try Dandelion Fig from the house of Shea and Blue. So next, going to the house of Mind Games, it's Blockade, this one right here. Blockade is Mind Games' take on a fragrance inspired by, or an alternative of something like Aventus. And when you wear this one, you'll kind of get those similarities, but it's completely different. For me, this is really cool because the mango skin and bergamot is what's creating the fruitiness of the reminder of Aventus, but it has tomato leaves, and you really notice them cutting through the fruitiness and the juicy citrusy touches here, giving me a green effect, which I like. I really like in this one. Along the way, you'll have pink pepper, mango flower, cyclamen, leather, lavender, patchouli, ambro star anise, and oud. The oud is kind of faint. It's there to give you a bit of a twist here on the fragrance. For me, it's a fruity, fresh fragrance, a Chypre style with that tomato leaf note. I really like this one as a great alternative to Aventus. And you know, Wilhelm Parfumerie also has a Aventus-inspired fragrance called Morning Chess, whereas in that fragrance, they're using the galbanum note. It's also a green bitter note. So here it's kind of a similar idea, whereas they're creating a Aventus-style fragrance with other notes and focusing on tomato leaves here. I really like this one. It is a bit pricey, but I like the way it turned out and a change of pace for the Aventus lover. So it's Mind Games Blockade. Next, go into the House of Perfumology. This is a perfume shop in Philadelphia, and they have their own fragrances. Lima is the fragrance I'm talking about, and I did a full review on Lima a long time ago in its original bottle. So now they have changed their bottles and they look like this. These bottles are really great, and the concentration of these fragrances are pure parfum, so really highly concentrated. This Lima is a garden-inspired fragrance, and it wears like that, but it's a garden that has these little water fountains, I would say, because the fragrance also has these watery touches. Not marine, aquatic for sure, but a really beautiful garden come to life with water fountains and water flowing and things like that. Peppermint, pomelo, lemons, lemon verbena, tomato leaves, lily, geranium, oranges, rose, copaiba, cashmere, ambrette, neroli, cardamom. There's a lot of notes in this one, and since my dad was a gardener, he did a lot of great gardening. He grew so many things, fruits, vegetables, herbs, flowers, all of it. I grew up in a garden pretty much as a kid, and I love the smell of gardens. This is basically a garden come to life. Sadly, my dad's gardens didn't have any water fountains, so the water was always flowing from a hose, but I would envision a water fountain here and things like that mixed in with all the fruits, flowers, herbs, everything that's all in here. So this is Lima from the House of Perfumology. Next, go into the House of Frank Los Angeles, another Bertrand de Chafour creation. It's Frank #1. This is cardamom, lime, bergamot, tomato leaves, leather, licorice, moss, berries, juniper, geranium. For me, it acts a bit like a fougere. It's a kind of a masculine take on a fragrance. I believe all three of the fragrances from Frank Los Angeles are male targeted. They could be unisex, I'm forgetting right now. And the tomato leaves comes in, gives it an aromatic bitterness against the spices, the citruses and everything. It wears kind of masculine. It wears spicy, woody, aromatic. And it also kind of hints a little bit at something like a fougere. It's not your traditional fougere here, but it has those kind of touches. But a really quality fragrance and not really expensive as well. I have a full review of the 3 Frank Los Angeles fragrances if you care to find out about them. I believe #3 got discontinued, so I think the only ones that exist are #1 and #2 now. But either way, Frank Los Angeles, Frank #1. Last but not least, we have the latest fragrance here from the House of Brioni. It's called EDP Essential. So this, again, is also another Aventus-like fragrance. At least to me, it wears like that, with the addition of the tomato leaves. And I should say this one I've mentioned in my review. The tomato leaves are not long-lived, and I wanted the tomato leaves to last longer in this fragrance. They don't, but it's there to accentuate the fragrance. You'll notice it at first. It starts very green, but it has notes of bergamot, tomato leaves, cardamom, patchouli, tonka, sandalwood, amber, and frankincense. Eventually, the fragrance gets ambery, woody, earthy, but it starts off citrusy, fresh, spicy, and green when it first, is spritzed. This is the 4th flanker in the Brioni EDP series. I think it's a good one. I just wanted the tomato leaves to last a little longer. But if I was to pull, the first 2 in the series are my most favorites. But I don't think this is a bad fragrance. It's just, I wanted a little more tomato leaf, and unfortunately we didn't get it. But either way, last fragrance I'm speaking about is Brioni EDP Essential, and that's the list of tomato leaves fragrances. Let me know if you have a favorite tomato leaf fragrance that I did not mention. This is a note I really enjoy and I'd like to explore more. If you have some that I didn't mention here, please put a comment down below so I can find out. And let me know if you're a fan of these fragrances that are featured in this video. Put a comment down so I can find out. But either way, guys, thanks so much for watching this video. If you have any questions or comments, please list below. Please like this video. Please share it. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye. So just giving you guys a bonus option as well, since it's brand spanking new. I just got my hands on it and I looked up the notes after I smelled it. I was like, what am I smelling here? It smells really pleasant. Tomato leaves with the tea notes. This is the new fragrance, or one of the 2 new fragrances from the house of Miller Harris. It's called Celadon. I don't speak a lot about this house, but they definitely have some great releases. And they just launched Celadon along with Soufflot. So these 2 are brand spanking new from this house. And I wanted to highlight this, as I said, because it does feature a prominent tomato leaves note along with mate tea. There's Ceylonese tea, magnolia, verbena, basil, cardamom, moss, rose, musk, lavender, smoky notes, and cedar. It's a great combination of the tea notes. Really wonderful, calming, relaxing, soothing tea notes with the green bitterness and aromatic touches of the tomato leaves. That's very prominent here. What I like about this one, when you're wearing it, there's a grassy effect. And whenever I see mate in fragrances, there's a prominent mate note in here. It acts grassy. You can actually experience it, but more like the dry grass with a little bit of the freshness in there. If you've ever walked on it, you can kind of get that smell in your nose when you're, crushing them. It's prominent here. But also the magnolia comes in. The basil is gorgeous in this one. Really nicely wraps the tomato leaves bitterness and sweetens it up a little bit, but more aromatic herbal touches as well, along with the verbena, which adds its lemony characteristic. But in the background, there's also faint rose in here, along with the other aromatics and musk. It's a really nicely musky fragrance. I think it's going to be a perfect fragrance to wear in the summertime. This one, I believe, once again, it's fresh enough, really fresh, extremely fresh for warm summer days. Unlike the other fragrance, Soufflot, which is very warm, very intense. Here, we've got a very fresh, very green, aromatic, tomato leaves focused fragrance with a lot of tea. So I think this is a great one to highlight just before I air my video. And you guys should know about it if you like the idea of tomato leaves and fragrances. This is Celadon.